One additional belief that's important to get rid of at this point is one that most people hold. Change is difficult and takes a long time. It's important to eliminate that belief when you're using the Lefko method because having this belief can make you anticipate having the same problems in your life even when the beliefs that cause the problems have been eliminated. When I work with people who have a fear of public speaking, for example, their thought that the fear must still be there can cause some fear even if every belief that originally caused the fear is gone. When they stop believing that change is difficult and takes a long time, the remaining fear goes away. At first glance, you may think you do not hold this belief. Of course, change doesn't have to be difficult to take a long time. But before you click Next Belief and skip this one, please answer these questions. Do you really believe, not intellectually, but in your gut, that you can get rid of a belief you've lived with for a lifetime in only a few minutes so that it never comes back? Do you really believe that you can get rid of thoughts and feelings about wanting the approval of others in just a couple of hours? And have those thoughts and feelings not come back after a few weeks? Unless you could answer yes to these 4 questions without any reservations at all, you almost certainly have a belief worded something like, change is difficult and takes a long time. The words you use for this belief might be slightly different, but it's unlikely you would answer yes to these questions without having a belief something like this. In order to make sure you get the full value from the time you spent eliminating mistakes and failure are bad and I'm not good enough, I'm now going to help you get rid of the belief change is difficult and takes a long time. Your belief might not be these exact words, but almost everyone has a belief worded something like this. Why is the belief so common? Because most people have tried to change and discovered they either couldn't change at all, or they changed and then the old pattern came back, or they needed constant reinforcement, or the change took a lot of time or a lot of effort, etc. In any case, few people try to change and discover that the change is quick, easy, and permanent. As a result, they form the belief you're going to get rid of right now. The program will now pause, so you can write in the text box on your monitor your version of the belief, change is difficult and takes a long time. Use the words that are the most real for you. When you finish writing, please click Continue. For the balance of our work on this belief, I'll refer to it as change is difficult and takes a long time. When I do, just substitute in your mind the exact words of the belief as you just wrote them. The next step to eliminate a belief is to find out when you formed it. A belief is usually not formed by a single incident, but by many similar incidents. What happened in your life that led you to create the belief change is difficult and takes a long time? In a moment, the program will pause again, and you can write down what happened that led you to form the belief. This belief probably wasn't formed in childhood. If you're like I was before I created the Lefko method, you tried to change in a lot of different ways, but didn't really succeed. Maybe you listened to CDs presenting programs for change, read books, took workshops, or even went into therapy. Maybe you made commitments to diet or exercise and they didn't work. Maybe you tried to change your behavior, or get rid of negative feelings, or even eliminate beliefs using some other methods. But often these efforts may have not worked as well as you wanted them to. Take the time you need to think about how you formed this belief, because this is important. The program will pause now, so you can write in the box on your monitor the type of things that led you to form your belief that change is difficult and takes a long time. When you're done, please click Continue. Look at the events you've written down. Can you see that the conclusion you reach, change is difficult and takes a long time, is a valid interpretation of those events? Can you agree that virtually anyone with your experience in trying to change would have reached a similar conclusion? Now we're going to play the same possibilities game we've played twice before. We'll imagine 4 friends of yours are visiting you and looking at a videotape of the events you just wrote down. Your interpretation of those events was your own words for the idea, change is difficult and takes a long time. That is one valid interpretation of your experience with trying to change. That interpretation wasn't wrong, but there are other reasonable interpretations of the same events you didn't think of at the time. So let's ask each of your friends for another alternative interpretation. Imagine friend number 1 looking at the events and concluding, "Oh yeah, come on, change is difficult given the tools and techniques you've tried so far. That doesn't mean there couldn't be any other tools or techniques that could produce change easily. It is true that you've had a hard time changing in the past. But doesn't your friend's interpretation explain your inability to change just as well as your belief? In other words, couldn't all your experiences with change be totally explained by your friend's interpretation? Change is difficult given the tools and techniques you've used to change thus far. But does that mean that there couldn't be any other tools or techniques you don't know about that could possibly produce change easily?" What does friend number 2 think? Couldn't friend number 2 look at the same events and form the belief, though you weren't able to produce the change you wanted by yourself or with the help of the people you've relied on thus far, it doesn't necessarily mean that someone else couldn't help you change? Couldn't this interpretation also explain the events just as well as your interpretation, that change is difficult and takes a long time? Friend number 3 might come up with a totally different interpretation. Maybe you couldn't change because you weren't ready before. That doesn't mean you'll never be ready. Can you see that this interpretation could also explain your experiences with change? Finally, couldn't friend number 4 come up with a totally different meaning for the same events? You almost certainly tried to change your behavior or your emotions without first getting rid of the beliefs that caused them. That's why change was so difficult. If you had first eliminated the belief that caused the behavior or emotions you wanted to change, change could have been very easy. Another good interpretation, right? It's not that change is difficult, it's that change without eliminating the beliefs that cause your current behavior and emotions is all but impossible. Now, couldn't any one of your friends' interpretations explain your prior experiences in trying to change just as well as your interpretation, that change is difficult and takes a long time? You're still answering out loud, aren't you? Of course they can. So do you now accept that change is difficult and takes a long time is not a fact? It's not the truth, but just a truth. Merely one interpretation of many possible interpretations of events earlier in your life. With a little help from your friends, you can now see that your earlier experiences with attempting to change could have at least 4 different reasonable interpretations or meanings. So take a few moments and really imagine the events that led to the formation of the belief, change is difficult and takes a long time. When you tried unsuccessfully to change in the past, didn't it seem like you could see change is difficult and takes a long time in those events? Like you could actually point to it? It did, didn't it? So you may have the sense you didn't see the belief, you felt it. Once you formed the belief change is difficult and takes a long time, you probably did feel it. If you had concluded change has been difficult so far because I haven't eliminated the beliefs that keep the old emotions in place, would you have still felt the change is difficult and takes a long time? Say your answer out loud, please. Yes or no? But what I'd like you to focus on now is not the feeling, but on my question. When you observed the events that led to your belief, didn't it seem as if you could see change is difficult and takes a long time? That it was a fact you discovered? It did seem as if you could see your belief, didn't it? Take another look at the events now. Did you really see change is difficult and takes a long time? If you think you did, just tell me. What does change is difficult and takes a long time look like? What color is it? What shape is it? Where is it? Did you ever really see change is difficult and takes a long time? Yes, I know you saw yourself trying to change and it took a lot of time or effort, or the change never really stuck. Everyone would see that. But can you actually point to change is difficult and takes a long time? You can't do it, can you? So is it real to you now that you saw events, but you never really did see change is difficult and takes a long time? Since you never really saw change is difficult and takes a long time, what did you actually see? Is it clear to you now that all you really saw was you spending a lot of time and effort trying to produce change in the past, and most of the time not being able to change at all? Is it real that the events in and of themselves had no meaning? You made up one meaning. Your friends have just shown you that there were several others. What happened was that you looked at events that could have had many different meanings and chose one, which was change is difficult and takes a long time. By attributing that specific meaning to the events, each time you saw your inability to change without a lot of time and effort, it was as if you could see that meaning in your circumstances. But you didn't discover the meaning in the events. You attributed the meaning to the events. They had no meaning before you gave them one. If it's still not clear that these events have no inherent meaning, consider this. Do you know anything for sure about change based on the difficulty you've had thus far in trying to change? All you know for sure is that you had a hard time producing change in the past, given the techniques you had available at the time and without having eliminated the beliefs first. And finally, if you never saw change is difficult and takes a long time out there in the world, where's it been all these years? Can you see that the only place change is difficult and takes a long time has ever existed is right there in your mind? That you never did see it out there in the world? If the belief is more real to you as a feeling than as a concept, here's another way to look at it. Didn't it seem as if your unsuccessful attempts to change made you feel the change is difficult and take a long time? It did, didn't it? I'd like to suggest, however, that your unsuccessful attempts to change couldn't have made you feel change is difficult and takes a long time, because you just acknowledged the events had no meaning. And meaningless events can't make you feel anything, can they? So if your unsuccessful attempts to change couldn't have made you feel change is difficult and takes a long time, what did make you feel that? If you don't know the answer to this question, I'll tell you. You felt that only because that's the meaning you had already given to those earlier events. Let me help you make this real. Imagine that I had been there when you were unsuccessful in your first couple of attempts to change, and I had helped you find alternative interpretations for your experience. And after that conversation, you concluded, change has been difficult so far because I haven't eliminated the beliefs that keep the old behavior and emotions in place. Really imagine that this happened years ago. Okay, now imagine that after this conversation, you tried again to change something in your life and were unsuccessful. Notice how it feels when you're thinking change is difficult so far because I haven't eliminated the beliefs that keep the old behavior and emotions in place. As you imagine this scene, does it still feel like your unsuccessful attempts to change are making you feel the change is difficult and takes a long time? Probably not. If you need more time to think about what I've just asked you to do, please click the pause button below and take as much time as you need. Then click play to resume. And if you didn't feel change is difficult and takes a long time then, would you feel it now? Again, the answer is no. So your unsuccessful attempts to change never caused you to feel change is difficult and takes a long time. That feeling came from your interpretation of the events. And since your feelings were not caused by events in reality, they were only the result of a meaning you made up to explain the events, is it real that your feelings tell you nothing about your ability to change? Let's take a deep breath, let it out, and now say out loud the belief you wrote down a few minutes ago. Your version of change is difficult and takes a long time. Do these words feel true now, even the slightest amount? It doesn't help to feel it's not as true as when we started. I really want you to get that change is difficult and takes a long time is not the truth and never has been. I'd like you to get that you form beliefs to give meaning to events that have no real meaning. You then think you observe the meaning in the events out there in the world. The meaning you made up becomes a fact for you. But as soon as you realize that the earlier events never had any real meaning, that the meaning was only in your mind, that it was never a fact, the belief disappears forever. I bet it feels very different when you now say change is difficult and takes a long time than when you said it at the beginning of this exercise. Is it clear that this belief isn't the truth, even a little bit? See, because if it feels true even a little bit, then the belief is still present. Just understanding the belief is not true isn't good enough. You must actually feel differently. The words must stop feeling true for you in order for the belief to be totally gone. If you still feel the belief is an accurate statement about reality, you probably still think you saw it. Once you realize you never really saw change is difficult and takes a long time, the belief will be gone. So please click Repeat to repeat that step of the process. Now that this belief is gone, it should be more real to you that profound change can be quick and easy. Let's check it out. Say the words to the first two beliefs you eliminated out loud. Mistakes and failure are bad. I'm not good enough. If there had been the slightest doubt about whether or not the beliefs were gone before, as you say the words of these beliefs now, do they have any resonance at all? Now that you realize the change can be quick and easy, is it real that the first two beliefs you worked on are, in fact, gone? The next belief is one that almost all of our clients have had, but one of the most difficult for people to acknowledge they do have. I'm not important. For some reason, people have an easier time acknowledging they believe they're not good enough than admitting they're not important. And yet, have you ever bragged about your accomplishments to appear more important? That's a sign you probably have this belief. Do you feel as if you're not important if you're left out of something or ignored? Another sign you probably have this belief. And finally, what makes you important? That's a trick question. If you need anything at all to make you important, then you can't believe you are inherently important. If you have this belief, it's crucial that you eliminate it if you want to get rid of your lack of self-confidence and start doing and saying what you need to move forward with your life. You now have a choice. Either click on Next Belief and move on to the next belief, or close the program. Then make a note to yourself when you plan to return to eliminate belief number 4.